Yes, I am the traveling gardener. And while I admire the grand gardens of the world, Canada's Boucharts, the fabulous gardens at Versailles, London's magnificent Kew, what I search out are gardens that could be nowhere else but where they are. Gardens with a tale to tell. Gardens that reflect the passion of the person who created them. Gardens that are sometimes, well, a little bit wacky. And I've chosen 8 of my favorites to share with you today. So, let's go see. King's Landing. For over 200 years, the buildings that made up King's Landing served well those living at the St. John's River Valley, an area so fertile that it was dubbed Little Egypt. Their refugees from colonial America found a home in the aftermath of the American Revolution. They were loyalists, American colonists, who chose to side with King George. At war's end, their homes and property was confiscated. To compensate their loyalty, the British government granted colonial land elsewhere, including the St. John's River Valley. In the 1960s, a massive dam project was undertaken on the St. John. In the process, realizing that an important part of American and Canadian history would be lost, the provincial government created a 300-acre settlement of 30 key buildings representing the time between the landing of the Loyalists through the 19th century. King's Landing Historical Settlement. Well, illustrating the fertility of the area, included in the historical settlement are period dooryard and vegetable gardens. Here, this cute house, the 1870s Frederick Purley House, its garden featuring tomatoes, because it was then tomatoes were recognized as being edible. Hops clamber along the Thomas Jones House, Justice of the Peace, and Brewer. Well, in between tidy apple orchards commemorate the work of Francis Peabody Sharp, Canada's first apple breeder. Well, all of this led to my primary reason for visiting Ingram House. The sturdy neoclassical house once held course directly across the river, slid across the frozen St. John in the dead of winter. It became a mirror image of itself. Well, the house's garden took my breath away with its Victorian garden and story to tell. An exuberance of bloom in seemingly haphazard array, snapdragon, strawflower, shaggy cleome, floppy clumps of golden glue, commonly known as outhouse flower. Ingram House had an octagonal outhouse, a 4-seater. Medicinal plants, here evening primrose for women's troubles, lamb's ear, should you need a Band-Aid. Ingram House was home to Ira, his wife Olive, and sister Hannah. I learned from caretaker Sherry Legacy. Well, Hannah ruled over the household. Whether or not Olive relinquished her position willingly is up to conjecture. Hannah even took over the raising of the couple's 3 children. One was named Hannah, but one element remained in Olive's domain, the garden that flourished much as it looks today. When Ira died, he left the house to Hannah. No mention if Olive had passed on. And there Hannah lived until the age of 97, leaving behind one of King's Landing's most important documents, a painstaking journal
that began with a pet lamb being confiscated by American patriots until the days close to her death. Over here, that yellow flower next to the shingles, that's the outhouse flower. Well, if you followed Harry Potter's exploits in the movie version of J.K. Rowling's series, you'll readily recognize the castle pictured here as Hogwarts, the boarding school for wizards. And here's the Inner Bailey, where they flew about on their broomsticks. In northern England, it's known as Alnwick Castle, home to the Dukes of Northumberland. The present Duke and Duchess unexpectedly inherited the dukedom in 1996, when his brother suddenly died. Well, one wonders what the present 12th Duke thought his wife had in mind when he gave her the nod and £5 million in startup money to create a garden. Well, lawns, certainly, a little boxwood hedges, a rose garden, perhaps a pond or two. Certainly, she had the bones of a perfect derelict site, a garden created in 1750 by celebrated gardener Capability Brown, long, long abandoned. What her husband most certainly didn't have in mind was a cascading water feature with 700 jets that squirt passers-by willy-nilly on purpose, a labyrinth of bamboo, a vegetable garden that encourages sampling, a gigantic tree house. Well, a whirlwind of controversy surrounded the Duchess's garden from the time of announcement. The nation's protective garden groupies protested its location. If a new garden was to be constructed, it should be in the south, where most of the horticulture showcases are located, not in the far north. Eyebrows further raised over a far-afield search for architects, even America, for heaven's sake. Well, from the beginning, the Duchess told me, I put my head above the parapet and was shot at. And then a poison garden. Well, how come, I asked the Duchess. Children find it a place of excitement and intrigue, she told me. But more seriously, it's a place to learn about the dangerous side of plants, an avenue to get people talking about the misuse of drugs, most of which grow in nature. Garden guides issue stern warnings. Do not touch any of these plants. There are plants here that can kill you. Some grow quite commonly in backyards. Foxglove, oleander, euphorbia. Others are easily found in the wild, many quite lovely. Here from, let's see, far left, going clockwise, deadly nightshade, 3 berries, and you're dead. Laburnum, convulsions frothing. Quaker's button provides nibblers with the final symptoms, a posthumous fixed grin. Hemlock, ancient suicide plant. Mandrake, said to shriek when pulled from the earth. Henbane, anesthetic mimics death, although victims usually recover. Also recovering are England's garden groupies, now that Alnwick Castle's garden has emerged as the 3rd most visited in England. That's for the Duchess. She'll probably keep poking her head out above the parapets. Well, there were 3 possibilities. I was waiting at the wrong harbor, had misunderstood the ferry's schedule, or was the only person bound for Lopud. The bench at the departure dock was mine alone. Ah, the ferry, part of a fleet that ties the islands and mainland of Croatia together, right on schedule. With that, passengers streamed out of nowhere, shoving, elbowing to be first in line, pulling their baggage behind them. As we pulled away from the dock, the headline ran through my head. Local ferry overloaded with passengers capsizes in the Adriatic. Well, escape from Dubrovnik was the reason I chose to head for Lopud. middle island of the Elafiti archipelago. Dubrovnik is one of my favorite cities on earth, but not in sweltering August, swarming with tourists, with 6 floating hotels in port. That was the reason I'd chosen to head for Lapud. A stop en route brought relief to the overloaded vessel. Ahead, the Bay of Lapud, with its picture postcard waterfront, a sleepy, idyllic getaway for Dubrovnikans, but 200 call pedestrian-only Lapud home. Well, it's hard to believe that Lapud was once the regional headquarters of the Republic of Dubrovnik and considered a superb example of 15th and 16th century planning. It is only when you know of its past that the existence of gjorgjic-mayneri Park makes sense. It was created next to a 1494 built summer villa of the noble Gjorgjic family, with a decision made not to invest in a luxurious home, but instead surround it in a garden in which spirits could soar. A garden so important that its creation influenced Dubrovnik's garden tradition. A garden neglected through 2 world wars, communist rule, and now newly appreciated and with volunteer help emerging from decades of botanical tangle. Well, today it takes more than a squint of the eyes to appreciate what the garden once was. Meticulously planned, architecturally designed on 5 acres, paths making their way through archways embedded with broken shells, echoing the curve of the bay. Plants are emerging, exotic specimens, as was the fashion at the time, many arriving as gifts from those invited to the villa. Weather-worn sculpture. I found the garden so fascinating that I returned time after time in my 3 days on the island. A delightful place to wander, deliciously cool under the midday sun. Well, first of all, I just want to say that my photos on this are not all that good, but I love the story and wanted to share it with you today. The reason this even came about was I was noticing on the map of Vancouver Island, every single road eventually ends in the water. And so I was on assignment for a story, Vancouver Island to the end of all the roads. And here in Tofino, I think this picture really illustrates it. So there it is with the final sign right in the water. But while I was in Tofino, I heard of Cougar Annie's garden. And so with an assignment in hand from Islands Magazine, I returned. And that's the reason I don't have good photos, because Islands was taking their own photos and I just wasn't thinking camera. So, the rugged and remote western edge of Vancouver Island qualifies as the world's most unlikely spots for farming, let alone garden. Rocky, storm-lashed, isolated, a coastline pushed tight against rising forest. Yet that is what the provisional government encouraged settlers to do at the turn of the last century, offering up to 160 free acres for those able to tame the land. Well, most threw up their hands at first glance, and some gave it a valiant try. But Ada Annie Ray Arthur was the exception. Her pioneer efforts exist to this day. Ada Annie, her husband Willie, their 3 children, stepped aboard the steamer Princess Makanini in April of 1915 and disembarked at Boast Basin into a vine-tangled, boulder-strewn landscape that had no thought to level. Of course, there was no boardwalk when she arrived. How was it that the Ray Arthurs alone had not flagged down the Princess Makanini for a fast journey home? Out of Tofino, A 35-minute flight on a tiny float plane delivered me to Boat Basin, where Peter Buckland, who had taken on the care of the garden, met me. Peter filled me in. Without Annie, there was no turning back, he said. Willie, the black sheep of a Glasgow, Scotland family, had developed an addiction to opium. In return for a small stipend, Annie agreed to keep him away from Vancouver's opium dens. Well, the wonder remains that while others saw impossible wilderness, Annie saw flowering bulbs, fruit trees, roses, a profitable nursery business. Feisty, determined, and barely 5 feet tall, she set about felling trees until a clearing appeared in the bush, eventually 5 acres, in which she began to work dawn to dusk for 72 years. The Princess McEnany began to deliver plants, as many as she could afford, for propagation. By the 1920s, plants packed in sphagnum began to be shipped out. Meanwhile, between 1915 and 1931, she bore 8 more children, 3 of whom died in infancy. When asked how she managed, she said, well, you do what you must. While Willie, a charming ne'er-do-well, avoided hard work, she counted on him for certain tasks. In July of 1931, the rowboat he'd taken into the harbor drifted back empty. Annie buried him alongside the children in the garden under stones now covered with moss. Those who found their way to Boat Basin found a family barely subsisting. To increase the food supply, chickens, rabbits, and goats were introduced. Cougars went on the prowl. Well, her primary motive was livestock protection, but eliminating cougars was profitable, $10 to $40 an animal. Cougars by the dozens fell under her aim. Able to fell a cougar while holding a shotgun in one hand and a lantern in the other, her fame spread. Cougar Annie. Buckland told me of his first meeting, spring of 1969, tramping about the area, ferreting old mining claims. I walked through the gate and rang the bell. A tiny lady with bright blue eyes came to the door. A friendship grew, with Buckland finding himself drawn to the clearing. Well, after Willie's death, Annie advertised for a replacement. In the years to come, she enlisted and outlasted 3. With a laugh, Peter told me that had she been a bit younger or he a bit older, he might easily have become number 5. Peter came frequently to the garden, helping as much as he could, but the wilderness was overcoming Annie's ability to keep it at bay. At 92 years, all but blind, but refusing to leave, she offered Peter the property, understanding that she could remain there as long as she wished. And there she stayed until her death at 97. Well, a lot of people thought I was nuts, Peter said, but all I knew was that I had to let the garden breathe again. Chainsaw gardening, he called it. And gradually the garden began to emerge. All it needed was light and air. We walked the path toward drunkenly teetering house to peer inside at molding piles of nursery orders and catalogs, canning jars filled with fruits and vegetables. We passed the propagating shed. Giant rhododendrons, gnarled fruit trees, roses roaming willy-nilly, azalea, mock orange, Willia, Daphne, beds of hosta, alstroemeria, iris, daylily, and all around pushing in impenetrable rainforest. Well, Peter has established the nonprofit Boat Basin Foundation as a field center for temperate rainforest ecology and to draw attention to the botanical diversity and historical importance of the garden. I knew from the beginning, he said, that my energies could take it only so far. Well, the buzz of the float plane announced my float plane's arrival. We circled the clearing, a tapestry of color and textures, a strange and mystical sight, the garden that owned Cougar Annie. It was on assignment to be aboard Sea Cloud, the 1930s plaything of heiress Marjorie Merriweather Post, turned small luxury cruise vessel, that took me to Il Biviere. The sail Malta to Malta, with naught but Sicily in between. What a fabulous, exciting thing it was to see these young, agile seamen and seawomen scampering up that rigging to set those sails. Well, researching Sea Cloud's Sicilian itinerary for a garden to visit, I came across Il Biviere near Syracuse. An email to the garden elicited the reply: "I'd welcome your visit. A driver will meet you at the dock." Signed, Principessa Maria Carla Borghese. Well, from the internet, I'd read of a garden with mythological roots involving Hercules that, in the eye-rolling way of myths, somehow led to the creation of a lake. When Sicily was under Arab rule, the lake was known as Il Biviere, meaning watering place for animals, a place so abundant in flora and fauna that for centuries it was favored ground for sportsmen, until the 1930s, when fear of malaria led to the draining of the lake. Lushness became dust and rocks. In 1968, Principes Scipione Borghese and his wife Maria Carla, owners of Il Biviere by 1392 feudal edict, decided to try their hand at farming citrus. That decision somehow metamorphosed in a Mediterranean garden. I had to go see. A drive through an unpromising landscape of industry and neglected agriculture led to a small bridge over the reed-choked Latini River, where we paused at a solid green gate that gradually opened to reveal an oasis of greenery. Passing a small chapel, 1724 in its facade, we pulled into the graveled parking area of a Mediterranean-style mansion. Principessa Maria Carla, a tall woman of elegant bearing that my arithmetic told me was in her 8th decade, greeted me. Our move to Il Biviere abruptly changed our lives, she told me. From my reading, I knew that her husband had died in 2001. How could we and our 4 children live in this terrible place? House a wreck, rocks and dust. I had a decision. I could continue being depressed or roll up my sleeves. She began to imagine a garden, trees, flowering bushes, vines. It was a garden that wasn't, she said. Where to begin? I had no gardening experience, then an idea. I could fill the long jetties of the ancient port with soil and plant them. But with what? I haunted nurseries and private gardens and became fascinated with succulents, endless variety. Today, the jetty's diversity of succulents have made Il Biviere a mecca for succulent collectors. In June of 1969, she continued, a lorry of unwanted extra plants culled by gardeners of Palermo's Villa Travia arrived. This gift began this oasis. Well, now it was time to stroll the garden path with the Principessa providing botanical names and stories about every plant along the way. Parkinsonia aculeata. I gathered seed on a visit to Greece in 1980 and fell in love with its flowers and jasmine scent. A towering palm near the swimming pool. Washingtonia robusta. A friend brought it in a terracotta pot when she came for lunch in 1978. Its progeny now punctuates the garden. 20 varieties of agave. 17 varieties of rose. This one, when we arrived at Il Biviere, it was just a thirsty bush struggling, now a rambunctious presence. On it went, with other than horticulture stories told. A 1988 phone call came to ask if the Queen Mother might visit. We lunched and walked the garden, the Queen Mother dressed in light blue head to toe, including her parasol. The Queen Mother was the first of hundreds drawn to Il Biviere through the years. Art critics, film directors, landscape architects, and many who, just like me, just love gardens. This story came about because I long wondered about a Chinese-owned company in San Francisco called China Focus. And they go nowhere but China. And one tour was $999 for a 10-day tour, including airfare. Too good to be true, or good and true. And that was the theme of the story that I wrote for the San Francisco Chronicle. But that tour took me to Suzhou. In the 13th century, Marco Polo described Suzhou as not unlike Venice, 6,000 stone bridges crisscrossing canals, men of wealth and consequence dressed in fine silk, for which Suzhou is still noted. Well, today, traces of Suzhou's former glory remain throughout the city, but nowhere more than in its classical gardens. At its 13th century zenith, more than 200 existed. Today, 9 are restored. The smallest, which I visited, Master the Net's Garden, is a UNESCO heritage site. The story goes that the garden was so named by its owner in gratitude to a fisherman who, with a swoop of his nets, saved his daughter from drowning in a canal. Well, today it would be easier to be drawn into the garden by a net than trying to find it through a tiny walkway and a tiny hole in a wall, and then following a crooked twist path of an alleyway that was contrived to confuse evil spirits, but not the smiling women dogging my footsteps, doing their best to sell me a fan? No. Chopsticks? No. Postcard? No. I escaped into the garden's formal reception room. The garden, like all of its time, was intensely lived in by its owner, his household, including first wife, concubines, and children. It was also a place of hospitality and business deals, with guests gathering to enjoy grand parties and strolls through a setting of nature recreated in miniature. With so much going on, people and geography, a sense of distance, depth, and space was incorporated. Walls swathed in greenery to hide the garden's edges. Areas separated by stone walls with intricately shaped windows, giving an impression of distant views. Routes leading through small spaces into larger areas that by a contrast appear bigger than they are. Yin, feminine, and yang, masculine, must be presented. Rocks pieced together to simulate mountains are yang. Lakes and empty spaces, yin. But rocks must have some holes, as masculine needs delicacy in order to completely understand. And lakes, islands, as the feminine needs masculine bravery to endure. Certain plants must be incorporated. Good friends in cold winter, representing courage in adversity, includes bamboo, because it returns upright after bending, and trees that burst into bloom from bare branches. Orchids are important. Flourishing in tucked away places, they symbolize modesty. But most important is lotus. Born from mud, it emerges from the water, clear and clean, a symbol of absolute purity. Well, I left surrounding the garden to find the gaggle of smiling women waiting. A fan? Oh, okay. The Vasa was a magnificent ship, decorated with symbolic sculptures and carvings, gold leaf on her poop, bronze guns polished to a fare-thee well. She was built as the pride of the Sweden's 17th century Royal Navy, designed to strike fear on the high seas. On a fine August day in 1628, king, court, populace gathered on shore. She was launched, sail set, flags flying, gun ports open for the royal salute. She floundered and sank. For 333 years, she lay in Stockholm Harbor. In 1961, she was brought up. With the salvage came skeletons of the drowned, along with some 24,000 preserved objects. Today, the Vasa Museum is located close to the spot where she capsized. The magnificently restored ship, along with interactive exhibits and films that bring to life the Vasa in her time, the museum has become one of Scandinavia's most visited attractions. A relatively few, however, make their way to a jewel of a Renaissance garden behind the museum. Entering via an alley draped in honeysuckle, as was done during the Vasa's time. Here, a replica of a sculpture retrieved from the Vasa. It's a garden where vegetables, medicinal plants, and flowers, cultivated by nobility and peasant alike during the time of the Vasa, are grown. For example, let's see, I jumped ahead here somewhere. There. White and yellow carrots, no orange, with the most original version of each species searched for. Detective work uncovered the carrots in a St. Petersburg gene bank. Peas. Dried peas were a staple for the crew's diet. Here is a variety grown by the Swedish seed savers. Well, flowers are present in the garden, but sparingly so, as was the custom. Boxwood borders are from that growing in Castle's Saxteholm's garden, where an 18th century document describes it as a very old variety. Signage invites lingering and immersion into the past, with a medicine garden describing the planting of herbs dispensed by the barber, medicinal officer, to seamen aboard the Navy ships. Fennel seeds, boiled in water, are beneficial for those who have the shivers, from the 1620 herbal book. Signage next to clambering hop plants told of the importance of ale for the captains and ale for the seamen, ending with, if anybody should steal hops from the hops garden, he is to be taken to the courthouse and judged. Medieval law. And finally, one that struck me not only by its aptness today, but that it was deemed so important so long ago. The earth is the most important thing we have. Be prepared to feed, fertilize, and treat it well. Swedish Housekeeping Handbook, 1660. Well, moss gone amok was not intended as a definitive element when Muso Sosek, a 14th century Zen priest and famed garden designer, created the gardens surrounding Saihyoji Temple. In Kyoto, that would come much later. Muffling a design original for its time, a garden to be enjoyed as an earthly pleasure, not as a religious exercise. Paths invited strolling, flat-bottomed boats took visitors about. The emperor was frequently seen night boating, his way lit by 10 tall candles. For 600 years, the temple's priests did their best to maintain Muso's past masterpiece through wars, fires, and floods. Finally, but one monk was left assigned to its care. In unharnessed shade, wet and humid weather had its way. Moss began to spread unhampered, smothering completely Muso's intent. Kokadera became known as the Moss Temple and one of Japan's most popular tourist attractions. Fuel bus fumes began to affect the moss. Feet pulverized the velvety softness. If the garden was going to survive, drastic changes had to be made. No longer could one just show up at the temple door. Now one must apply for a permit. I applied for an entrance permit a week in advance, and I also knew that I could not wander the garden until after participating in a Zen contemplative exercise. Inside the temple, I built my body into a position so easily assumed by those around me to kneel in front of an inches-high desk to trace a series of Japanese characters, 278 characters comprising the sutra. Shifting in pain from hip to hip, I did my best until an English-speaking monk appeared to whisper that I could instead write my name on the paper along with a wish and place it in front of the shrine. Now I was free to enter the garden's cushioned quiet. Meandering pathways reveal an endless variation on the theme of green. Moss-covered bridges, moss-encircled tree trunks. I fully expect to see moss-covered koi swimming in the moss-reflected garden. A total of 123 varieties of moss have been identified in the garden. To tend the garden, gardeners sweep it. Through a gate, moss-covered, slippery steps lead to an upper garden. In the distance, Mount Torgataki appears as one with the garden, following a classic design principle. Everything within sight of the garden is the garden. My best guess as to the garden's Zen meaning: accidental beauty reduced to a single element. You know, as a writer, I very rarely hear from people unless they've taken offense at something you've written or have caught you in an error. And so it's a delight to receive something. The editor of the Portland Oregonian sent this on to me from a reader. I write to thank the author of the Moss Garden piece in today's Oregonian. I would not have survived the kneeling, but I want to thank Yvonne Horn for doing that on our behalf. May the wish she left at the shrine come true. But most important for me was this sentence: everything in sight of the garden is the garden. I immediately translated that into everything in sight of a room is part of that room. Thus, my one-bedroom apartment in Portland instantly included everything I enjoy from the window. The 7-Up top building and the same shaped building across the river, the white glint of the revolving loaf of bread through the walnut trees now leafing out, the white stag sign, the construction boom and crane up toward the West Hill, and the hill itself. What a large and interesting room I do have. So, there we have the traveling gardener.